heart surrenders to your design. You gave me purpose, so I give my life. I'm giving you all of me. Out of the darkness and into your light, my heart surrenders to your design. You gave me purpose, so I give my life. I'm giving you all of me. Forever I will lift my voice. Forever you will be my choice. Forever I will stand for you. I'm giving you all of me. I'm giving you all of me. Forever I will lift my voice. Forever you will be my choice. Forever I will stand for you. I'm giving you all of me. I'm giving you all of me. I'm giving you
Whoa. Oh, hey guys, good morning. Oh, sorry, I was just watching some great YouTube videos on the most exciting roller coasters in the country. How many of you like roller coasters? I love them, but I have to tell you a secret. Even though they're so much fun, I scream my head off like crazy. My boys always joke that if they ever lose me at Valley Fair, they just have to follow the sounds of the loudest screams. So what's your favorite part of a roller coaster? Is it that first climb up the hill, the big drop, the corners, or maybe when you get safely at the end of the ride? I think one reason we like roller coasters is because they aren't boring. Well, guess what? When God calls us to a life with Him, He calls us to a life that's more exciting than a roller coaster ride. So let's go to our Remember verse today and let's say it out loud together. Salvation is found in no one else, for there is no other name under heaven given to mankind by which we must be saved. That's found in Acts 4:12. Our story for today is about Paul's exciting trip to Rome. Like a roller coaster, his trip had ups and downs and surprising turns. So buckle up and let's hear about Paul's exciting trip to Rome. The trip starts with Paul in trouble in Jerusalem. People who didn't love Jesus got him arrested for no real reason other than just to get Paul in trouble. But that wasn't enough for these people. They wanted to kill Paul just because he told others about Jesus. But you know what? They didn't get to hurt Paul because God helped Paul escape. In Acts 23:16, it says, when the son of Paul's sister heard this plot, that's his nephew, he went into the barracks and told Paul. That's right. He heard of the plan and he warned Paul so that Paul could get away. And that very night, the commander sent Paul out of town. You know what he did? The commander hid Paul in the middle of 470 Roman soldiers. That's a lot of soldiers to protect one man. But God called Paul to life with him, and God protected Paul. When God calls us to a life with Him, He can protect us. I don't know about you, but when I heard that He hid Paul and all those soldiers, it made me think of Where's Waldo? If you were hiding in people that looked like you, do you think they would find you? Pretty amazing plan. Once Paul was safely in Caesarea, he had to wait and wait and wait. And wait some more. Kind of like we've all been waiting and waiting and waiting to see our friends when we're stuck at home. He had to wait for 2 long years. Think about that. How old will you be in 2 years? What grade will you be in school? But Paul did not waste time. During those 2 years, he kept on telling governors, a king, and a queen all about Jesus. So even though Paul was waiting, he kept doing what God called him to do. It's the same thing God has called each of us to do. Tell people about Jesus. When God calls us to a life with him, he gives us a mission to tell others about Jesus. Finally, after all that waiting for 2 long years, the governor sent Paul to Rome. This is what Rome looks like now. But in Paul's time, it was the most powerful and important city in the Roman Empire. It was like if we got sent to Washington, D.C. to go speak with the president. It was that important. Paul and the soldiers guarding him boarded the ship. They sailed away to the island of Crete. And when they got there, they found a harbor to stay in for the winter. But what do you think? Did the soldiers want to stay put? No, the soldiers wanted to stay in a different harbor. They walked up to Paul and said, "Paul, we don't want to stay in this part. Let's get the boat and let's sail to a different place." Paul spent a lot of time on ships in his missionary trips, and he knew that ship should not move. He warned the men not to leave the safe harbor. But do you think they listened to him? Nope. And so they left the safe harbor. At first, it seemed like Paul was wrong. But then a gentle south wind blew. But Acts 27:14 says that soon a wind of hurricane force called the northeaster swept down from the island. The winds blew the ship out onto the ocean in the middle of the open sea, right in the middle of the terrible storm. Close your eyes with me and imagine with rain and lightning and thunder and scary winds. Oh man, now imagine that kind of storm for 2 whole weeks. 14 days that storm lasted. The men on the ship were terrified they would die. They should have listened to Paul and stayed in that safe harbor. But they weren't going to die. Why? Paul prayed and God heard his prayer. God sent a special messenger to Paul. In Acts 27, verses 23 through 26, it says, "Last night an angel of the God to whom I belong and whom I serve stood beside me and said, 'Do not be afraid, Paul. God will save the lives of all who sail with you. So keep up your courage, men, for I have faith in God. Nevertheless, our ship will wreck.'" That's wonderful news. Maybe not about the ship wrecking. Do you think the sailors and soldiers on that ship were glad Paul loved and served God and heard from him? God speaks to his children. He may not send an angel. But if we listen to God's word, the Bible, and obey it, he will send us answers we need. When God calls us to a life with him, he calls us to hear his voice. So, did God keep his word? Of course he did. After 2 weeks in the storm, the ship got stuck on a sandbar near the island of Malta. The ship broke in half in the waves, but all the men on the ship made it safely to shore. Everyone survived, just as God had promised. God always keeps his promises. Wow. Paul's had such an exciting trip so far. He's been arrested just for telling people about Jesus. He was hidden in the middle of an army. He spent 2 years in jail. He spoke to a king and a queen, and now he's been shipwrecked. What else could happen? Let's read in Acts 28 to find out. Paul gathered a pile of brushwood, and as he put it on the fire, a viper, driven out by the heat, fastened itself on his hand. But Paul shook the snake off into the fire and suffered no ill effects. That was an amazing miracle. But that's not all that happened on Malta that was amazing. Paul prayed for many people, and God healed them. Even though Paul was shipwrecked because someone else made the mistake of sailing out of the safe harbor, even though he was a prisoner on his way to trial, And even though he was stuck on an island and had been bitten by a snake, Paul still showed God's love to others. Paul obeyed God's call to live a life with God. After about 3 months, Paul finally sailed to Rome. But guess what? When he got there, his troubles didn't end. He lived under arrest in a house and was guarded by soldiers while he waited for his trial. Paul couldn't go where he wanted to go, and he couldn't leave town until his trial. He was kind of stuck, but that didn't stop Paul from doing God's work. He told people about Jesus and wrote letters that became books of the Bible: Philippians, Ephesians, and Colossians. Paul understood something we need to understand. When we live a life with God, we always win. Paul wrote about this in his letter to the Romans. In chapter 8, verse 37, it says, "In all these things we are more than conquerors through him who loved us." Does that mean that nothing sad or scary will ever happen to us? No. Sad and scary things happen to everyone, both the people who live a life with God and the people who don't live life with God. But when we live life with God, he has promised to never leave us alone. And the best, the most exciting life is the life we live when we answer God's call to live life with him. So don't forget, choose to live a life with God and have an awesome week.